Good afternoon, and welcome to the last concurrent session of the 2021 ASFPM Annual Conference. We're so glad you could attend this event, and I hope you got as much information out of all the great presentations as I did. I'm Meg Galloway, a policy advisor for ASFPM, and your moderator for session J6, Modeling Flood Warning Systems. Planning on a watershed basis is so important for effective flood risk management and resilience efforts. So I think we're going to all get a lot out of the presentations. We have a great lineup of speakers for you on this subject. Now, before we start, I want to go over just a few housekeeping things. I will introduce each speaker. Then after I introduce the speaker, we'll watch their presentation. And then use the remaining, and it should be approximately 10 minutes for each of our speakers to answer as many questions as possible. Asking questions is easy. Just use the chat box at the right side of your screen. I'm going to suggest that you submit your questions to the chat box on the far right pretty early, because if they all wait till late in the session, it's really hard, and so many come in, and the earlier ones we can read and get all set up to go. If you see questions from someone else you like, hit the thumbs up symbol just to catch our attention. And with that, we're going to get started. Our first presentation is Introduction to Louisiana's Watershed Initiative, and our presenter is Alexandra Carter. Ms. Carter is a certified planner and a resilience planning manager with Louisiana's Office of Community Development Disaster Recovery Unit. She is currently working with the state and local stakeholders to implement the Louisiana Watershed Initiative, which launched in August of 2018 by Governor John Edwards. And it aims to lead long-range vision for the state's multi-pronged approach to mitigate future flood risk focused on natural boundaries. Alexandra, please start us off.
Hi, my name is Alexandra Carter. I am with the Louisiana Watershed Initiative, and I work for the Office of Community Development in Louisiana. I'm excited to be here today to present on the Louisiana Watershed Initiative and the work that we're doing. I'm the program manager, but by no means am I doing all this work by myself. I think it's important to acknowledge that there are a lot of program partners, and there are teams and teams and teams of people that are working with me to see all of this important work through. And so today, as part of our panel, I will be talking about what the Louisiana Watershed Initiative is. We'll be talking through some program approaches, and then hopefully, if we're managing time well, we'll leave some time for questions. If at any point you hear snoring, my dog is sleeping under my desk. So it's not me, it's the dog. All right, so what is the Louisiana Watershed Initiative? It is a statewide initiative that acknowledges this huge challenge that we face in Louisiana, where we sort of organize ourselves by political boundaries, by parishes or counties, but realize that flooding does not follow these political boundaries, and instead really follows what we refer to as watersheds or drainage basins. And these drainage basins cross state lines, making it really difficult to manage water, to manage flood risk, and to really mitigate flood risk long term. And so what we really accept with this challenge is that actions in one community can impact entire ecosystems. And what we don't want to see is, one community working really, really hard to reduce their risk, and another community maybe just kind of try to economically get by, and, resources are being spent. And at the end of the day, we're just really shifting risk around the state. And so what we see, in recognizing this challenge, that there is an opportunity to fundamentally change the way that the state just approaches flood risk and how we think about managing water. And we can do this if we are proactive about how we address flood risk and statewide floodplain management. And we're very fortunate to have strong leadership with our state, with the governor, and with our mission. We have 5 state agencies that sort of lead the charge of the Watershed Initiative, and focus on reducing flood risk, improving floodplain management all throughout the state, but then also maximizing the natural and beneficial functions of the floodplain. And so we see a real investment in nature-based solutions and green infrastructure. just to reiterate, when we talk about watersheds in the main, we want to make sure everybody understands what we're talking about. We're talking about a drainage basin of an area of land that all drains to a single point. And it's important to know that no matter where you are, you're in a watershed, and that large watersheds contain smaller watersheds. And we generally describe them based on the USGS codes, the HUC 8, HUC 8, HUC 6, and we don't have to go into the numbering. If y'all want to know more about it, let me know in the questions. The guiding principles behind this statewide effort to really think about flood risk management differently focuses on these sort of 4 tenets, which is really that we have to use scientific tools and approaches. We have to be very transparent and objective in our decision making, so there's no closed door meetings. That we always look to opportunities to maximize the natural functions of the floodplains and really work with nature instead of against it. And that also there's a huge opportunity in regional water management, and that we can sort of see cascading impacts in reducing risk. If we think a little bit bigger, we think about systems management rather than, I would say, more of the traditional, like the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and so, resist the squeaky wheel for a minute and think about the big system and how we kind of manage it and maintain it so that it performs better long term. Throughout all of the work, I think we're always reminding ourselves, all of the team members and stakeholders are constantly thinking about these 6 tenements of, if you will, the work. That is, do we have the data? Is there a standard we can set? Have we engaged appropriately? Are there plans that we should be integrating? Is the person that I'm talking to having the capacity to do the work I'm asking them to do? Or do they have the capability? Is there training that's needed? And then finally, the activities that we're sort of proposing or that we're working on, how are we funding them today? How can we fund them tomorrow? What is a sustainable funding solution so that the investments we make in the next, years to come are able to be sustained well into the future? And then I think, kind of going back to the leadership, it's so important to recognize that there's a team, there's a huge team, and there's lots of agency, thankfully, in the state of Louisiana around this issue. And what you see here are the 5, what we call Council on Watershed Management member agencies. And so you have the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, the Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries, the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development, and Louisiana Office of Community Development. And all of these different agencies have some aspect or responsibility related to flood risk management. Together, they're able to sort of create a comprehensive picture of all the different responsibilities and perspectives that need to really come to the table to manage water holistically. So not just from a watershed, but also from sort of agency perspectives. And so clearly, we recognize this is harder. It definitely requires more work. It is politically risky, but it's the right thing to do. And we're really fortunate to have, again, strong leadership across our state and in our stakeholders committed to this mission as we all work together. And this is really a picture of that framework on this shared focus on resilience. And so what you see here is really the structure, right? So it all sounds nice. It's good to talk about objectives and, principles, but like, how does the work actually get done? And so what you'll see here are those agencies that we had just talked about making up the Council on Watershed Management. They help make the difficult decisions, but they're informed by these technical advisory groups that are made up of state agency folks that all represent each of their agencies. And then at the same time, we have these regional steering committees that are made up of stakeholders all throughout the state that are organized by watershed, that are creating sort of their own perspectives and building from their experiences, their own narratives that need to be incorporated into the statewide work. And so you may be asking, this is, how we get the work done. These are great principles. Well, how is it being funded? It's being funded through HUD dollars, Housing and Urban Development dollars, either federal grants. They were issued after the 2016 storm. So we had 2 big rainfall events in the state of Louisiana in 2016. And they're mitigation dollars. So they're a little different than disaster recovery dollars. I don't know whether or not y'all are grant managers, but this is a big difference in that they're not tied back to the storm in the same way that disaster recovery dollars are. There's a little bit more flexibility in how these dollars can be used. And so you can see that flexibility in the focus on how these funds are planned. And so if you have more interest in this, I would encourage you to visit our website and look at the action plan itself. This is a 190-page document boiled down into 3 columns, right? And so what we're focused on is really making sure that the investments we make in mitigation are based on good science and tools, right? Think back at those principles. And so we're investing in watershed modeling all across the state. We're investing in a gauge network. These are river and rain gauges that give us data on how our rivers are flowing, the models and the maps. And then we're also developing a user-friendly data portal so people can access this data and use it to inform their understanding of risk, but then also use it for other purposes in academia or, insurance or banking or however they like to use it. We're also looking to invest in flood risk reduction projects. We made big announcements in the last couple of months. We'll talk about it in a minute around actual projects that are being awarded dollars. And then we're also moving into sort of these regional programs, which is sort of acknowledging there's this big opportunity to make a big impact if you manage regionally and you make big impacts with large projects that trickle down effects. And so really looking at regional watershed coordination and looking at higher development standards that are sort of elevated at a regional scale. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about these programs. So big picture, how it works, how it's being funded. I should note that the funds that are supporting those different approaches equal to a $1.2 billion grant. That's a 12-year grant that we just recently entered into with HUD back in September of 2020. And so we're just now kind of getting all the wheels turning more quickly, but there's been a lot of planning and preparation work that's happened since 2018. And so speaking of that, this is one of those programs, the Regional Capacity Building Grant Program, which really organized the state in a way that was manageable, that kind of reflected the way water actually moves. And so you see these 8 regions on this map that do not align with county or parish boundaries. And this is a grant program. $400,000 was allocated or granted directly to each region to build capacity and capability. One of the things that they're charged with right now is providing recommendations for regional governance or long-term watershed management, and to produce a regional project inventory list. They're also involved in selecting projects. And right now, they're doing outreach on their recommendations for long-term watershed management. And I would say this is really important to just having a sustainable framework to manage water in the state of Louisiana. And it's really built on the idea that the regional stakeholders have to have a voice. And so this is their voice, and we're helping them, right? We've just released an outreach and engagement toolkit for them to use that has like really accessible information about all the programs, and it helps to build their capacity. Similarly, right now, we're working with all the regions to have these presentations on watershed management long-term funding opportunities. And so if you're interested in trying to figure out funding, this white paper is being discussed across all the state of Louisiana, and it's meant to sort of provide a jumping off point to have a common understanding of what opportunities exist. Because we know we've got to think long-term, and that the grant dollars are not going to last forever. So the regions are getting stood up. They're thinking about long-term governance. They're working through funding. And we're also working on modeling, mapping, and modeling, right? So all those focuses they're coming to life across Louisiana. The first thing that we worked on doing and that we're successfully moving forward with is updating our precipitation frequency estimates for the state. I don't know how technical y'all are, but basically these are the estimates of rainfall that inform what we consider our design storms. So your 100-year storm, your 1,000-year storm, your 500-year storm. For some of y'all, I would say maybe more accurately reflect, this is a CFM type conference, so I should say 0.2% event, 1% storm. Those are y'all the right numbers to use. But the short and long of it is we want to make sure the data that goes into developing these design storms is up to date so that our infrastructure performs like it should, and that it reflects the current conditions. And so this investment is being made now by the state so that future projects we fund and models that we run are using better data. Similarly, we're actively installing now 100 sites or gauges. So this is river and rain gauges. There's a web app online if you want to check it out. You can see where they are and what the status is. There are water quality sites included in this. And then for the modeling effort, I will say this has been a big effort in coordination with the Department of Transportation and Development. Task Order 1, which kind of got all the modelers going, is nearly complete. And you'll see here a map of the actual modeling team. It is a little different than the regional work. It's just because of contracting purposes, though. So, don't worry too much about it. If you have questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. But the regional modeling is nearly underway, and that we should be entering into those task orders this spring and summer. And so it's moving along. And then I think when you look at the state of Louisiana and you see the modeling, right? And this is the scale of it is, I would say, not traditional in terms of a state taking on this level of effort. So I do think it's important to recognize that we are working sort of hand in hand with the Army Corps of Engineers in partnership. They're actually part of our technical teams reviewing the models. We have sort of a no-cost memorandum and another memorandum of understanding where we actually pay for their support. And so I just want to be very clear that we acknowledge the scale. It's a significant effort. It's not duplicative of the Corps. And if anything, it's very much in alignment with the Corps. And so where they have done recent modeling, we're coordinating. And likewise, where we're doing modeling, they're coordinating. And so hopefully we all see significant benefits to both programs and activities. And then, so that speaks to planning, right? Planning and data and modeling, we need to understand our risk. To speak to projects, right? The dollars that are being put to work now in Louisiana, the state agencies that are leading the Watershed Initiative recognize that they have plans and they have projects that have already been identified, and they're in a very good position to move those forward. And so have been identifying those over the last year that are consistent with the action plan, and recently awarded $163 million worth of projects to begin to reduce flood risk in the immediate future, where those projects didn't have a risk of having downstream or impacts to neighboring communities. And so this is a map of the projects that have been funded, but you can definitely go online, check it out. There's a web page, you can click on the projects. There are one-pagers for all of these, and there's a summary. I would say they're a little bit more traditional because they are, again, kind of being launched more quickly, but they will help to reduce flood risk. And there is definitely work we need to do today to ensure that flood risk is being mitigated. And then there's another grant program. So that was sort of a state agency program. This one is more regionally focused, right? We recognize that the state and the regions have very different perspectives, and those both have to be accounted for. And this local and regional program is similarly situated to say, we need to implement low risk, high impact projects that will mitigate flood risk and encourage prioritization of projects through regional collaboration. So the regions that we mentioned earlier are actually helping to select part of this competitive allocation. And so this is up to $100 million. We just recently closed the application period, and we're actively reviewing and scoring projects now. We'll start by the state making a $60 million or up to $60 million award. And then the remaining projects will then be sent to the regions, and they can pick up to $5 million of projects per region. This is the program timeline. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but if you're interested, it's here. We did receive about 190 applications. It's important to note that for this program in particular, there are more rounds of funding that will be available once the models are complete and once we get in a better position to be able to understand those risks and impacts. And so just if you want to stay informed, check out the website. It's going to be really interesting to see all the regions make their selections. And we're more than happy to sort of engage with any partners across the country if y'all are interested in these activities. Beyond kind of awarding and modeling and planning, we're constantly in, I would say, a process of program development activities, specifically, I think, related to this other leg of what I think of as the four-legged stool of the program. Is we have to really make sure we're giving enough attention and focus to nature-based solutions. In receiving round one, and even looking at the state projects, we realized that we needed to spend more time training on nature-based solutions and really focusing on this more actively in project design. And so we're doing that now with a training seminar series throughout summer 2021 and through 2022. We're also launching and working to kind of pursue buyout programs in the parishes that are highlighted here. They're Cameron, St. Tammany, and Vermilion. And we're working in partnership with those leadership across the state. And then I think relevant to y'all, we're also doing a lot of work around CSRS strategizing with university partners, CRS user groups, and just really seeing what we can do to take the CRS activities that happen at a local level, they're managed by floodplain managers, and how those can be sort of regionalized. You can get a better economy of scale and more support. And so these are all the strategies that we're working on now are all informed by the various plans that have been developed in the state. And there have been some cool ideas that have come across that we're following up on. Right, I'd love to get feedback on this. And so really, it's about kind of addressing the gap of SIP and CSRS. And so it's very exciting, and I would say I'm happy to take y'all's questions. And then at this point, I hope I left enough time. It looks like, let's see, let me check my clock. We got 5 minutes, and so I'll stop talking. And I apologize if I went too quickly. The last thing I'll say is that if there's anything I can leave you with in terms of what's going on with Louisiana, is that we're sort of getting our act together when it comes to managing flood risk. We're investing in planning, we're investing in science and data, we're investing in our leadership's capabilities and capacities and their ability to sort of organize and create processes for making difficult decisions. We're investing in projects, and I think we're better understanding how every decision has cascading impacts on our environment, on our resources, and on our sort of long-term implications for planning and management. And so I'm really excited to be here today, and I'll stop at that, and I'm very excited to answer questions.
Thank you, Alexandra, for that very informative presentation that really will be helpful to anyone working on planning at the watershed level. We do have some questions, but if you haven't put yours in, there's still time to put one in. The first question we have is, how long did it take for this program to evolve from an idea to reality? Were there any key actions or decision points that drove it forward?
Thanks so much, Meg, and for everybody else joining. I think it's important to know that it did take some significant actions. It was built from an executive order. So the governor wrote an executive order that charged the 5 agencies to work together and to develop and investigate what it would take to manage water based on statewide. And so that happened in 2018. That's what kind of launched the whole effort. And they immediately had a phase 1 investigation where they had a contractor come in and do sort of a full-on, how do we do this? What are the things we should be considering? And how do we think about this comprehensively? And that put them in a really good position to understand sort of the landscape of opportunities. It wasn't until like a year later that HUD allocated these dollars to the state. And so a lot of the planning and theory behind this happened when there was no funding source available. And so I would say like the funding source becoming available, that enabled them to staff up to be able to support these efforts. And that was a huge change. I mean, we talk to other states all the time that are looking at statewide resilience, measures, and they often face this sort of huge barrier on how do we get this moving. And unfortunately, I think the funding is a huge part of it. It did catalyze that report. It put a lot of momentum behind those activities, and you already had people that were already ready to do the work when there wasn't any money. And I think that also is really important. You had sort of champions who, when they found out there were funds, they were like, oh, great. But they were already motivated by the right reasons beforehand.
Okay, now Eileen has a question. It's great to see training on nature-based solutions. The Natural and Beneficial Functions Committee would be interested in hearing more about the content of what you're covering. Are you interested?
Yes, we would love to coordinate with y'all. We've listened to your podcast the FEMA podcasts, and the one recently, I think, on y'all's BRIC program and its emphasis on nature-based solutions made me sort of think there's definitely room to collaborate and partner. We have a training series. We haven't yet finalized the curriculum, but we have like it's drafted. So it would be lovely to work with any partners that are also thinking about this and trying to figure out what is the best way to sort of tackle this challenge.
Okay. Jordan wants to know if there's a lot of interest from the public for this program. Does the public involvement vary by reason? And if so, is that a challenge? I meant region. And is that a challenge?
It is. I mean, it's hard sometimes because, like, especially when the foundation is science and data, like in Louisiana, it is challenging to boil down the technical to the point where your everyday citizen can appreciate what value is added. And so I'll say, though, regionally, the people who are involved vary in skill set. Like, all of the regional steering committees are really diverse and representative. And I would say they're all very supportive, but we still have work to do in engaging the general public. And right now we're kind of in the process of strategizing around a couple of tools that can boil this message down to like 90 seconds that really engages and hopefully, I think, lays the foundation to where you can actually have a conversation with them about what it means to them and what they need to get out of this, and so how we can be better positioned to meet their needs.
Okay, and we have one that just came in from Julie. Please provide a website, and if possible, please provide executive order example from, and then Julie's apparently with the, or from the Pennsylvania Management Agency. They're
That's
doing
perfect.
A similar project.
That's great. I mean, so if you search online, JBE EO 18-16, that's and I don't know how to do the chat, so I'm so sorry. I'm trying to figure out, is it everyone? Because I could just put it in the chat, or if y'all want to, I can maybe get the membership of this group, like y'all's emails, and I can just shoot you the executive order. But I can also say the website is pretty simple too. It's watershed .la.gov. And so you should be able to just pop that in and you'll be able to, I mean, we're very, very, I would say, not to be complimentary, but we're very good about making sure all the content is up to date. It's reflecting the work. And like, as we launch new programs or materials, it's there. And just making sure it's very accessible in terms of a website format. And so I'll just kind of reiterate, it's watershed.la.gov. And then the executive order is JBE EO 18-16. And it should pop up from Google. I've grabbed it a couple of times that way.
And I'm actually going to throw a question of my own in here, having worked for a state agency and on efforts with multiple agencies and partner groups. Have there been challenges working across the agencies and the regions? It seems like it involves a lot of people with competing interests.
It does. I mean, I think you kind of have to go in knowing that people are not going to always agree, and sort of just respecting the perspectives and the missions. And just, it's kind of like water, it's going to find a way to the lowest point. And so we just have to be really, dedicated to just not letting an issue go just because people don't agree in the first meeting or the second meeting, and to continue to kind of be creative about how we meet people's minimum in terms of what they're willing to compromise. But I will say it helps that with the office that I work with, that's the whole point, right? Like, it's the Office of Community Development. So the mission is driven for the betterment of all. And so, like, my background is in planning. And so we're kind of in a good position to listen and then work with everybody. And so it is challenging, though. The regions are competitive with the state agencies are competitive with each other. And for good reason. I would say, like, it's a good competition. It's a good sense of, it keeps everybody on their toes. So there's challenges, but there's also sort of an accountability to the program that what otherwise wouldn't be there if it didn't involve as many stakeholders.
Okay, great. And I'll just let you know that Julie did send me your email address or her email address, and I'll get that to you. Okay,
Great,
I
thank
think we have about a minute left, so I'm going to ask one more to see if we can get it done within that minute. How is the timeline managed, and what should we look forward to in the next years to come?
Yeah, I mean, I think up until this point, it's been hard to manage the timeline, right? Because in the beginning, there really wasn't a funding source. Then there was a funding source, but we had to wait for HUD regulations. Like, you know, they issue a grant, but then they take about a year and a half to tell you the rules for the grant. But like I kind of mentioned in the presentation, they just kind of approved our action plan. We just received this line of credit in September. And so it's really exciting, I think, that this next year, even the next year following it, it's just more predictable. It's more within our kind of control. And so we're hoping to sort of get these regions really stood up, really work with the policy, continue to issue project dollars. The regions just this summer are going to be making recommendations on project selections for round one. And so I would say stay tuned to that if you're interested. It really, you know, where you think about, especially as, you know, floodplain managers, where you're thinking about policy and higher standards, we have found the kind of nice niche with the regions in that you might not be able to do this with just one parish leader, but if you pull 5 or 6 parish leaders together and you talk about doing things as a group, they're more willing to work towards that end. And so I would say stay posted, because that's a piece we're really excited to get moving, and they're even more motivated when they're given the opportunity to work together to projects, you know, to select projects and pulls them all in the right space to work on other ends and for the betterment of the whole region.
Alexandra, thank you again so much for all this great information.
Thank y'all so much for having me.
All right, with that, we're going to go on to our next presentation, which is the Trinity River Common Vision Program, 30 years and growing. And it's presented by Mia Brown. Ms. Brown is a senior environmental and development planner in the North Carolina Texas Council of Governments. Mia currently manages the Trinity Common Vision Program, the FEMA Cooperating Technical Partner Grant Program, and other regional floodplain programs, which provide training and resources to communities in the region. In addition to supervising work on the Regional Public Works Program. She's a member of the Texas Floodplain Management Association and has been a certified floodplain manager since 2016. Mia, we're ready to go.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending this session. My name is Mia Brown, and I am an environment and development planner with the North Central Texas Council of Governments. Today's presentation is called the Trinity River Common Vision Program, 30 Years and Growing. So before I jump into what the Trinity River Common Vision Program is and what we're doing to move it into the future, I want to talk to you about what NCT-COG is. So the North Central Texas Council of Governments, or NCT-COG, is a voluntary association of, by, and for local governments established in 1966. We help communities in our region with a lot of things, from planning for common needs to strengthening collective power, recognizing regional opportunities, and helping resolve regional problems. We cover a 16-county area that surrounds the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex in North Texas, and we have over 230 member governments that are made up of cities, counties, school districts, and special districts. NCT-COG has numerous departments. The Environment and Development Department, it has several strategic initiatives, and one of them is watershed management. The Watershed Management Program in the Environment and Development Department focuses on water quality, stormwater, and floodplain issues. Something unique about our region that you can consider while you're listening to this presentation is that the North Central Texas region does not have a unifying flood control district. We have a lot of local or regional entities working on their own in their jurisdictions and also working cooperatively with each other. And so while NCT-COG would never be able to replace a flood control district, as an agency, we work toward regional cooperation on flooding issues to help everyone achieve their common goals. To really drive home why we have these types of initiatives, I should mention that the North Central Texas region is the 4th largest metropolitan area in the United States with a population of over 7 million people, and it's one of the fastest growing in the United States. This is a graphic from the Texas State Demographer's Office with projected growth by county through 2050. And you'll see in North Texas, you'll see Dallas and Tarrant counties in the middle, and the counties surrounding them in dark blue and the lighter blue are about to see, and actually are already seeing, explosive population growth. The area that we're going to focus on in this discussion is the eastern portion of the Metroplex right here. This is Kaufman County and Ellis County, and this is the area we're going to talk about. That darkest blue color is up to 500% population growth in the 40 years represented on this graphic. So it's a really unique opportunity to work in a fast growing area. This is basically just a different way to look at the same growth. It's really more oriented towards density. So this animation shows growth in Dallas-Fort Worth in the North Central Texas region from before 1955 to the projected 2040 date. And so as you go through the decades and see the different colors, you'll see how our population not only becomes denser, but it also starts to spread out. So at this point, with the red colors, we're looking at the 1990s through the early 2000s. And then the purple is the 2040 forecast. That's a lot of growth. And if you'll notice, some of that high density growth from now to 2040 is happening in that eastern area in Kaufman and Ellis counties and southeastern Dallas County. So that brings me to the Trinity Common Vision program. The Trinity Common Vision program has been around since 1989, and originally it had 9 cities, 3 counties, and 2 special districts. All of these communities and special districts are located along the Trinity River corridor. However, you'll notice that the slide actually says 10 cities and 4 counties, and a couple of these communities, Seagoville and Kaufman County, have asterisks by them. And that's really kind of what this presentation is about. We also have really important partners from the state and federal government, including the United States Army Corps of Engineers Fort Worth District, FEMA Region 6, and the Texas Water Development Board. So I'd like to give you a little background about how this program got started, so you have some context for what the story is as I talk about how the program grows. Basically, in a nutshell, there was a big development boom in the 1980s in Dallas-Fort Worth. And a lot of this development was happening along the Trinity River corridor, some of which was in the floodplain. And this rapid development in the floodplain was very concerning to organizations such as the Army Corps of Engineers. They were really worried that there could be catastrophic consequences from this type of development during a major flood. And for context, there are levees on the Trinity River from downtown Fort Worth through downtown Dallas. And one of their concerns is unchecked development causing a flood to overtop the levees. So the Corps of Engineers performed some studies, an environmental impact statement, and ultimately came out with a record of decision. This record of decision suggested that damages from a major flood could total more than $11 billion if floodplain development is unregulated. And so their statement was that a comprehensive floodplain management program could cut that by more than half. And so that's how the Trinity Common Vision program started. All of the communities along the corridor, the original ones that I mentioned to you in one of the previous slides, as well as those special districts and partners, got together and signed interlocal agreements to authorize this program and also an Upper Trinity River feasibility study. So ultimately, there are 2 main parts to the Common Vision program. There is the cooperative aspect, which is made up of the Flood Management Task Force. The Flood Management Task Force, or FMTF, is made up of the technical staff from the communities along the river in this program. And they meet 4 to 5 times a year to talk about what's happening along the river corridor and what floodplain related and other issues that they're experiencing. And NCT COG participates on that task force as a partner and a facilitator and carries out a yearly work program, which the communities actually cost share into. The overarching committee over FMTF is the Trinity Common Vision Steering Committee, made up of elected officials from those same communities. The other side of the program is the Corridor Development Certificate process. So while participation in the Flood Management Task Force and the Steering Committee is completely voluntary on behalf of the communities, the Corridor Development Certificate process is not voluntary. And that is because of the record of decision. The corridor development certificate process is interesting in that it is actually an additional permit that communities enforce that is on top of or in addition to their floodplain management permits that people would normally fill out. This is codified in their ordinances as something that developers must do. The CDC process is guided by a manual. The first edition manual came out in 1991. We're currently on the 4th edition, and we're actually getting close to having a 5th edition. The Corridor Development Certificate, or CDC process, requires that applicants who would like to develop in the FEMA 100-year floodplain demonstrate that they have met 3 common regional criteria, which we'll talk about on the next slide. The communities and entities in this program do get to comment on all projects in this program area. So there is a regional review and comment aspect, and there is technical review by the Corps of Engineers as a technical partner. And that review determines whether or not a project meets those common regional criteria. At that point, a community would issue a final action of whether or not they are granting or not granting that CDC. There is an exemption process for things such as small scale projects, and there are options for communities to issue variances. Those are pretty uncommon. They're not necessarily in the spirit of the program as a whole, but those variances and options do exist for extenuating circumstances. Over 200 projects have been permitted along the Trinity River using this process over the last 30 or so years. And the models that are used for that are continuously refined and updated. In fact, the CDC process actually is based on current and future development conditions. Those are using 2050 watershed hydrology, or what we just tend to call future conditions, for a full build out. Those conditions are based on future land use plans, projected population, and other factors. So those common regional criteria are those you see on the screen, and there's 3 of them. Basically, there are no rise in water surface elevation, no increase in erosive velocities, and no loss of valley storage for the 100-year floodplain. The CDC program and the USACE actually do reference the SPF, or standard project flood, which is roughly an 800-year event. But the regulatory component of this program only applies to the FEMA 100-year floodplain. And that's where CDCs are required. Communities also have to submit CDCs for their own capital improvement projects. This does not just apply to private development. In the case of capital improvement projects, the community rules on itself. It still has to go through the whole process, and the other communities get the opportunity to submit their review and comment. This is a map of the Common Vision program area. So you'll see in the middle there are Dallas and Tarrant counties. And all the purple shaded communities are what we call the original members, the 9 cities and 3 counties. So Dallas, Tarrant, and Denton counties, and then the 9 cities you see there. The red area is the East Fork Trinity below Lake Ray Hubbard. East Fork Trinity is a large Huck 8 watershed, and what you see here is the southern portion of that downstream of Lake Ray Hubbard. And those are prospective communities that are being pursued to join this program. The communities in yellow are actually already mapped into this program, but were not part of the original agreement. So just to reiterate, the CDC program goals accomplish a lot of different things. They help limit impact, but does not eliminate impact of floodplain encroachments. It establishes a consistent regional review process. It provides a funding stream through partnerships with our state and federal partners. It provides oversight for projects constructed in the 100-year floodplain, while still allowing development in the floodplain. And once again, it involves that project review by all members of the Common Vision Program and Flood Management Task Force. This is a graphic I always take from the Corps of Engineers because it's a really effective way to talk about why this program is so important. So there's 7 pieces on this pie. 6 of the pieces are the federally managed flood control projects in the Trinity River Common Vision area. The largest piece of that pie is the CDC corridor along the Trinity River corridor that's inside this program. The flood storage available in the Trinity River, just that portion of the Trinity River, and this does not include the future portions that we're talking about, has more flood storage than two of the largest federally managed flood management projects put together. So it really demonstrates how important it is to preserve that flood storage and for all of the communities and partners to work together. And like I said, that's just for the original portion of the program. Think about the benefits that you can see when you start adding additional storage from new parts of the Trinity River. So that brings us to the question, why even grow the program? This request actually initially came from one of the Common Vision members, Dallas County. If you look at this close-up of the Common Vision map, the original footprint of the CDC program actually cuts off in Southeast Dallas County. And that area, along with areas in Kaufman County and pretty much everywhere along that portion of the East Fork Trinity, is already experiencing a lot of growth. And as you saw in the graphics in the beginning of the presentation, are poised to see explosive growth as we continue through the next several decades. So this idea caught on pretty quickly with the other members in the Flood Management Task Force, because this is a great opportunity from a regional perspective to get ahead of development with proactive measures like the common regional criteria we discussed. One of, one of the big differences that you would see as new communities join the program is, in this case, participating in the CDC process is voluntary. Like I mentioned earlier, doing the CDC process is not voluntary for the original communities. Also, the East Fork Trinity in this portion of the main stem that you see in Southeast Dallas County is a Zone A on the flood insurance rate map panels. Now, when you see that, you should say, what? That's kind of a big deal. This is a really, really fast growing area and one of the fastest growing metropolitan areas in the region. And we have a major river that's a Zone A. So that's also a real big impetus to really try to grow this program and bring these communities in from a cooperative standpoint and a better data standpoint. So we can preach all day about the benefits of preserving flood storage in the river corridor, but at the end of the day, what do the communities get out of it? Well, there's a lot of things they get, and you can kind of break it down by these basic words. They get data, which is up-to-date floodplain mapping and that future watershed hydrology I talked about earlier. They get partners, United States Army Corps of Engineers Fort Worth District, FEMA Region 6, all of our other regional partners, many others, the state, Texas Water Development Board. They get a balance. There is regional review and comment, but there's also guaranteed local control of those floodplain management decisions. At the end of the day, the community or the permitting entity is the one that decides whether or not to issue a corridor development certificate. There's consistency through the common regional criteria that helps stabilize flood risk. Also, it helps give communities a larger voice through unification of this program. And they can use that voice in larger efforts, such as what's happening in the state of Texas right now, the state flood planning effort. That effort that's run by the Texas Water Development Board is actually divided by watershed, and the Trinity River watershed is one of the flood planning groups. Also, the program helps with saving money. When you think about the East Fork and the fact that it's currently a Zone A, developers have to go create new floodplain modeling every time that they go and try to develop something. They would no longer have to do that if this area was transformed into a Zone AE. And also, residents would benefit from that because they could see flood insurance savings if their property is in a Zone A that is then goes to a detailed studied Zone AE. But that's a lot of reasons. Are there any others? Yeah, there's one that's in Grand Prairie off of Interstate 20. That's another one in Salina, in the upper part of the East Fork watershed, actually. There's a reason at Grapevine Lake. There's a reason in the levees in downtown Dallas. This is in Crandall, which is actually one of the communities in the southern East Fork area that we're pursuing. These two photos are in Wise County, which is in the northwestern part of the North Central Texas region. All of these photos were taken during the 2015 May-June floods in North Texas. This flooding event was huge in our region. And as bad as some of these pictures seem, our region came out very fortunately from that flood because we had so much flood storage, and also low reservoirs before the event because of drought. This was a real eye-opener for a lot of people. I know that we tend to not forget that flooding happens, but it's easy to become complacent. And this was also one of the drivers that really led us to start pursuing these other communities and developing areas. So you have to start somewhere. And where we started was getting the word out. We invited all of the prospective communities to community meetings. All of these, except the very first one, were actually held in that watershed. The NCTCOG offices are located centrally in the region in Arlington, but that is not convenient for the vast majority of these communities. So we held 7 meetings from 2016 to 2019, including 2 at the Dallas and Kaufman County Commissioners Court meetings. We invited floodplain administrators, development staff, and anyone else who was interested from all of the prospective communities to pitch the idea and talk about those resources and benefits that would be available to them. This way, we could introduce the program and foster discussion between communities, which helps create collective buy-in. It's still helpful to meet with communities individually, and we have done that a few times as well. But when everybody's in the room together and gets to talk about all the benefits that happen when people and communities come together, it really does help create that collective buy-in. NCTCOG staff and the partners also offered to speak at city council or commissioner court meetings where the communities thought it would be helpful and if we received an invitation. In addition, we provided estimated cost shares. As I mentioned earlier, Trinity Common Vision is a cost sharing program for participating in the flood management task force aspect. And those cost shares are divided partially by going to the Corps of Engineers for their involvement and assistance in the program, and the remainder goes to NCTCOG for facilitating and participating in those programs and carrying out the annual work program, which the communities vote on every year. Now, it's great to invite communities to join a program, but we really can't ask them to do all the work. So we created an ordinance based on the original 1989 agreement between the original communities to consider and for the communities to take to their council or their court. We also held a CDC training, essentially a how-to of how the program works, how to submit an application, and what the review process looks like back in September 2018. We invited all of the prospective members and also some of the original members. This was helpful because the original members could talk about their experiences with the program, how their communities benefited, and also offer mentorship to the different communities as they enter the program. We also needed a little help from our friends, but I guess it was a lot. It was a lot of help. So FEMA and the Corps of Engineers really pitched in here. They're already great partners, but we thought that the work that needed to be done in order for new communities to participate in the CDC process was going to require an ask from the communities for some money. FEMA Region 6 ended up contributing roughly $1.5 million to perform a detailed study of this portion of the East Fork, Trinity, and the Trinity main stem to take it from that Zone A to Zone AE. That mapping is currently in the preliminary stages. So it's not effective yet, but it will be in the near future. Also, the Corps of Engineers contributed $270,000 to create the 2050 flows for the CDC process so that communities can regulate to those future conditions in the program. That work is anticipated to be complete in 2022. So again, this was all contributed from our federal partners with no ask for community match. That's huge. That not only is a monetary incentive from the community standpoint that they can enter this program without this financial burden, but it's really also a good show of faith from the federal partners that they are real true partners and they're committed to the success of this program. So how's it coming along? Well, since we started this process, we've had 2 communities join. I mentioned them earlier. That's the city of Seagoville and Kaufman County. They've been participating in all of our meetings. And while we don't have the CDC products they need yet, as I mentioned earlier, to fully participate in the CDC process, they are participating in the regional review and comment of projects, in addition to being active participants in our meetings. So maybe what's keeping other communities from joining? Well, a lot of communities have questions, maybe hesitations, or maybe there's other circumstances that have prevented them from joining as quickly as Seagoville and Kaufman County did. And all of them are very understandable. Some of the questions we get are, will developers not want to build in my town anymore? Well, that's kind of where that mentorship comes in handy. This program's been in effect for a long time, and development is still going, but it's a tough question when you're a smaller community that's starting to develop. What do we get for our cost share and our trouble? If I'm on the upstream end of this program, why should I join? What do I get out of it? We do have one community in the prospective East Fork area that is not in the NFIP. There's also staff and elected official turnover as we go through the process of spreading the word about this program. And so that really requires that we help start over and really engage with those staff and elected officials as that happens. And to really kind of harken back to the community that's not in the NFIP and really kind of a mindset that may be beyond just that one community, why would we want more involvement with regulators? You mean partners. In the context of this program, FEMA Region 6 and the Corps of Engineers are not regulators, they are partners. So what's next? Well, we have a few things we need to do. One of the things we need to do is continue improving the CDC program to make it more accessible and user-friendly. So the NFIP CDC Model Consolidation Team, which is a subset of Common Vision communities and partners, are working on updating the CDC manual to the 5th edition. The reason it's called the Model Consolidation Team is because currently in the CDC program, applicants are working with 2 models, the current effective FEMA model and the future conditions CDC model. So, and as FEMA updates the East Fork area, they've also been georeferencing and doing work on the models in the original program area so that it can more easily be consolidated with the CDC process. So a team has come up with a process to basically outline how that works, and that necessitates change to the CDC manual to the 5th edition. Also, the 4th edition was published in 2009, and while it's had some minor updates since then, it's starting to get outdated, and this is also a really good opportunity to make the manual more user-friendly. Also, as part of that accessibility, NCT COG was requested by that team, as well as the rest of the Flood Management Task Force and Common Vision program, to create a new CDC informational and tracking website. This website has been really popular, and we're really happy to have been able to develop it. You can actually visit it at trinityrivercdc.com. This website has all kinds of information. It's a one-stop shop. So you can browse it just to look at the map and list of CDC permits that have already been issued or that are in the process right now. You can get all of the materials you need to do a CDC application, download the CDC manual, and the biggest deal is you can download the current CDC model. Prior to this website being launched, the model, which is maintained by the Corps of Engineers, was also housed by them. And anytime someone needed that model, they had to go to the Corps of Engineers to get it. This was really inconvenient for everybody. And so what we did was we created this website partially to be able to host this model for download. The Corps of Engineers updates the model fairly frequently as projects are submitted and completed. And so they have a way to access the website and upload the latest model. Also, we show historic versions of the model in case that's useful for anyone. But of course, anytime you submit a CDC, you should always use the latest model. So that is a public website, and you can visit that at any time. There's also a part of the website that is for tracking, and that is while the different applications, CDC applications and their tracking status are viewable on the public website, we also have a website with a login that communities use to submit the applications and communicate with each other online. And it's really helped streamline the process. Also, we still need to talk with our communities and see if they'll join. NCT COG and partners continue to host meetings as information from FEMA and the Corps becomes available that we talked about earlier, those mapping resources, and just also in an effort to help the communities consider to join. So we have opportunities coming up. Dallas County actually has something called a Southern Cities meeting, and we'll be speaking there next month about the program along with our partners. We also are going to continue outreach and collaboration from both COG and our existing partners. Of course, that was really dampened by the COVID-19 pandemic, but we hope to, in the future, begin having that in-person collaboration again soon. And as that new FEMA mapping and the new CDC products become available, that's a tangible asset for the communities. It used to be we would say, well, you can participate in the CDC program when we have this stuff, but we can't show it to you right now. You can see the existing program, but it's a lot easier when the communities can see it in their hand and go, oh, I can actually use this to regulate development. It really kind of helps show how helpful it is and is really just a tangible thing to potentially convince them to join. With that, I'll conclude my presentation. This is my contact information on the screen. Please feel free to call or email me at any time with questions about our program. And also feel free to visit our NCT-COG Environment and Development website and any of our social media. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mia, for introducing us to the Trinity River Common Vision Program. We don't have a lot of time left, but we do have one question from Alan, and that is, does the future watershed hydrology include expected impacts of climate change?
That's a great question. So Atlas 14 came out fairly recently for the state of Texas. So I do believe that's being incorporated from a rainfall standpoint into that watershed hydrology. But other than that, I'm not sure I could really comment on that. I'm happy to take questions in my email as well to answer that more specifically, since I really should probably talk to the Corps of Engineers about what exactly kind of data they're utilizing for that.
Okay, and I will just share the one comment that was made by BJ, and that's the Gulf of Mexico Alliance has a lot of contacts with communities. It's led by EPA, NOAA, and 5 coastal states. So with that, Mia, thanks again for your presentation today.
Thank you.
All right, and now we're going to move on to our final presentation, Watershed Scale, Coastal Resilience, Concept through Delivery Case Study. It's about Delaware's inland bays town of Dewey Beach, Reed Avenue area resilience. And this will be presented by Larry Trout, Jr. Mr. Trout is a professional engineer and is deputy director with Straughan Environmental, bringing experience in the area of coastal resilience, modeling, shoreline erosion, protection assessment, and design. He has 25 years of experience. He has unique expertise in the areas of shoreline protection, including living shorelines, wave surge modeling, sea level rise projections, coastal erosion control, green stormwater infrastructure, stream restoration, hydraulic and hydrologic routing, erosion and sediment control, and flood control design throughout the northeast part of the country. Let's begin the presentation.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm Larry Trout of Straughan Environmental, and my co-presenter today is Jim Eisenhardt of RK&K. We are presenting a case study for watershed scale coastal resilience in Delaware's inland bays. Delaware's inland bays consist of 3 interconnected bodies of water in southeastern Sussex County, Delaware. Rehoboth Bay, Indian River Bay here, and Little Assawoman Bay. The bays extend from Rehoboth Beach at the north end all the way down to Fenwick Island at the south end. The inland bays are shallow with an average depth of 3 to 8 feet. Because they are shallow and in many areas poorly flushed by tidal movement, they are sensitive to environmental changes, including increases in pollutants. Increases in impervious areas lead to increased runoff and contributes to pollutant loads to the bay, especially in Rehoboth Bay, where the percent impervious is 13.7%. In addition to the increased pollutant loads, the SR1 coastal highway runs between the inland bays here to the west and the Atlantic Ocean to the east. And the towns of Dewey Beach here, South Bethany here, and Fenwick Island here are located along a very thin strip of land in many areas, making these areas highly susceptible to both flooding and erosion from both sides. As a result of the increased frequency of extreme high tides, nor'easters, and hurricanes, the bayside portion of the town of Dewey Beach has experienced increased flooding. Shoreline erosion is also occurring at many of the dead ends of the streets on the bay side of the town. So here's the dead end. You can see the road has actually been lost in this area. This is Dagsworthy, and this is Reed Avenue, where it was actually lost previously. Bayside flooding is also occurring further south along the SR1 coastal highway. So this is SR1, this is the bayside, and this is the ocean. There's dunes here. There's not really any dunes or anything to protect the SR1 from the bayside along here. And then there's also shoreline erosion that's occurring. This is some erosion from the bayside along SR1, and then this is actually a dune that breached from the Atlantic Ocean. It breached through here, and it's allowing water to come in from the ocean to the roadway as well. So as a result of the increased pollutant loads in the bays, as well as increased flooding concerns in the communities along SR1, there have been a number of assessments performed and plans have been developed. Our presentation will focus on just two of these assessments and plans. The first one is the Town of Dewey Beach Phase 2 Stormwater Plan. Phase 1 of the plan had focused primarily on gathering data related to the existing stormwater infrastructure. The objective of the Phase 2 plan was to develop a prioritized green infrastructure stormwater plan, innovative stormwater management and living shoreline techniques, and to address stormwater management nutrient reductions as well as flooding. Project partners including the Delaware Center for Inland Bays, a national estuary program, the Town of Dewey Beach, and the Delaware Department of Transportation, or DelDOT. Funding sources included a Delaware Water Infrastructure Advisory Council surface water matching planning grant, and funds from the Town of Dewey Beach, as well as in-kind services provided by DelDOT and the Center for Inland Bays. The second assessment and plan was the Coastal Green Infrastructure Techniques for the Protection of SR1. The objective of this assessment and plan was to perform a vulnerability assessment and identify opportunities along the SR1 corridor, as well as to complete a demonstration project with the overall goal being to identify coastal green infrastructure techniques that could be implemented along the SR1 corridor. Project partners included DelDOT, CIB, and the Delaware Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control, or DNREC. Funding sources included a DNREC Strategic Opportunity Fund for Adaptation, or SOFA grant, and a Federal Highway Administration Green Infrastructure Techniques for Coastal Highway Resilience Research Project grant. The Dewey Beach Phase 2 Stormwater Plan focused on the drainage areas to 8 storm drain outfalls. So that those outfalls are all located along here that go to the bay. Each of those drainage areas is identified by the streets, being Dagsworthy, McCarthy, Reed, Rodney, Dickinson, Van Dyke, Collins, and Bayberry. And the percent impervious to each of these areas was pretty high. All of them exceeded 80%. Two of these outfalls, Dagsworthy here and Reed Avenue, there's significant flooding that occurs down here in these low-lying areas. So the flooding is caused by the low-lying area, as well as there's undersized pipes for these storm drain systems. So with increased extreme high tides frequency, and as well as the storms that produce surge and wave, these low-lying areas are becoming more susceptible to flooding. The higher ground areas along SR1, that corridor is actually sandy, and the water table is a little bit higher, generally more than 2 feet below the ground is a groundwater table, and they're indicated by hydrologic soil group A. So this green area here, hydrologic soil group A, that's where the sandy soil with deeper groundwater table is. Here is soil D. So even though it's sandy, the groundwater table is pretty high. So because of those things, we were actually recommending the use of shallow microscale green stormwater infrastructure practices along the SR1 corridor to increase infiltration, reduce runoff and pollutants from entering the existing storm drains and ultimately the bay. The plan recommends practices such as shallow bioretention, permeable pavement, and concrete removal, and with replacement of soil amendments and plantings once you remove the concrete. And those will occur primarily along the SR1 corridor. You can see these areas here, that these blue areas are pavement removal and soil amendments and plantings. The green areas are the micro bioretention areas, and the gray areas are permeable pavement, primarily in the parking areas. This is all going to be take advantage of that hydrologic soil group A, where we have good infiltration rates, and this will reduce the amount of runoff, but it'll also reduce how much water gets conveyed into the storm drain system, into the undersized storm drain systems, and helps reduce flooding as well as reduces pollutant loads to the bay. The plan also recommends storm drain and roadway improvements along Dagsworthy and McKinley Streets, as well as Reed Avenue. So the west ends of these streets are getting flooded. So we would raise these up a little bit, about 6 inches. We would replace the storm drain system, and then the storm drain system, we would add tide valves to prevent high tides from backing up into the storm drain system. And then there's also some parking area improvements along here. The Coastal Green Infrastructure Techniques project performed assessment along the SR1 corridor from the town of Dewey Beach to Fenwick Island. So Dewey Beach from here all the way down to Fenwick Island. And transects were located along here, strategically located, in order to identify areas of vulnerability. Some of these transects were actually correlated to the FEMA plan, the study that was done for FEMA. One of the key elements of the assessment included determination of potential surge and wave height impacts on the road, as well as the role that existing tidal marsh and breakwater obstructions play in dissipating wave energy and helping to provide protection to the road from erosion and flooding. This is important because as marsh loss occurs over time, specific areas will become more vulnerable as they lose the energy dissipating protection that is currently being provided. The assessment identified current problem areas as well as areas to watch for potential problems in the future. Potential techniques that were identified by the plan include protection of the existing marshes by living shoreline techniques, as well as potential thin layer application and drainage improvements in the marshes to prevent drowning of the marshes and conversion to open water. Natural levees and dunes were also identified to provide additional flood protection. The first demonstration project is at the west end of Reed Avenue. The end of the street was experiencing erosion. So back in 2008, they added pocket beach here. You can see they put some stone sills here with a gap here and created this little pocket beach. A little bit of a dune here, but not high enough to prevent water from flooding the street. There were some tide valves added to the storm drain outfalls, but nothing more really to prevent flooding. The pocket beach has helped with erosion, but there's allows water like wave action to get through this opening and displace the sand here that has to be replaced on occasion. So the goal for this project was to include shoreline stabilization, flood reduction, and water quality improvements. In addition to the DENREC, SOFA, and the federal highway grants that I mentioned previously for funding of the demonstration project, there was also a community water quality improvement grant that helped to pay for this project. So here's a plan view of the construction that was proposed and implemented. You can see there were some stone sills added here where that opening was in the pocket beach. And then there was fill placed here and marsh grass planted to create a marsh here. And then this dune was raised up. There was a little bit of a dune here, but it was raised up to a constant elevation of 3.5 feet here. And then some storm drain replacement here, storm drain pipe replacement, and the addition of tide valves here, and a replacement of this box with a new inlet / junction box. And then over here was created a braided reef, a braided oyster reef that's made out of shell bags and oyster castles. So here's a section view through the stone sill, the marsh, and the dune with the ESCO flood barrier here used for some structural integrity. And here's a profile of the storm drain that shows the oyster reef here, the replaced storm drain pipe with the tide valves here, with the dune over top, and the new inlet / junction box here. And then here's a detail of the braided reef with oyster castles at each end and shell bags here, stacked shell bags that are tied together with hemp rope. And all this creates this natural reef. This was actually designed and constructed by Doug Janik of Sovereign Consulting. So here's some photos, some before photos on the left and some renderings on the right. These are photos and renderings that we used during our public presentations to kind of show what the public, what this would look like. Here's some more. This is, the top is facing out into the bay with the before on the left and the rendering on the right. You can see some marsh creation in that rendering in the upper right. On the bottom, you can see looking north along the shoreline. This is the area where there's an existing, was a little bit of a dune here, and then we're going to raise it up and add the HESCO in here as a spine to provide some additional height here we needed due to space constraints, but also provide some structural integrity. So here's some photos during construction. There's a constant battle with water, whether it be groundwater or tides. It was a constantly dealing with water everywhere. Here's some more photos during construction. Our contractor was Brightfields, and they did an excellent job with this project. Getting close to completing the project here. And then even closer, you can see here the HESCO flood barriers I was talking about. They're essentially like gabion baskets that are lined with geotextile, and the top is left open so you can actually plant stuff in here. In our case, we planted beach grasses, so it's like buried, partially buried, slightly above ground in some areas and completely buried in other areas. But you can see this is the spine here that we later planted with beach grass. Here's a photo of some photos of the kayak launch that we also included so that they could access, the public could access the water. That was a big important element of this project. It was also pretty challenging to get to work. And here's where we were doing some of the beach grass plantings. This is Bob Collins from the Delaware Center for Inland Bays. He actually installed, him and his daughter installed all of the plantings here. And then this is we were testing to see whether or not the valves were working. So here's the downstream end of the storm drain outfall. It goes like this. Here's the storm drain, the inlet / junction box, and there's tide valves up in this end. This is an example of what one of those tide valves looks like. This isn't actually tide valves that was installed, but this is the kind that was used. Here's some dye placed at the downstream end during a high tide event, and during that same event, you can see there's no green dye coming back into through this inlet and surcharging. There is some water here, but that water is actually groundwater from upstream that gets into the storm drain system. Doesn't really have any place to go during high tide, real extreme high tide events. And so there's a little bit of ponding water from groundwater that occurs on the upstream end, but a lot better than dealing with the tides. And so here's some photos after all the beach grass and marsh plantings were installed. And they actually installed some dune fencing along here too. So it's really starting to take shape here. Here's a view from the water, from the bay, looking towards it. And here's a nice drone photo. The drone does a really nice job. This photo I really like because it shows the back. You can see the ocean, Atlantic Ocean, and then the forefront, you can see the Rehoboth Bay, and you can see it's not very wide of a swath here, so it's a pretty narrow strip, and there's other areas that are even more narrow. So the second demonstration project was at the northeast corner of Reed Avenue and the SR1 intersection. The goal of this project, goals were to reduce runoff and improve water quality. Funding was provided by a DENREC Community Water Quality Improvement Grant and also by a DelDOT paving and sidewalk improvement project that was being constructed within the town of Dewey Beach. And their contractor actually constructed this project. So here's a plan view. This is the area, relatively small area that we had for this bioretention facility. There's also some permeable concrete parking area here, some sidewalk improvements or replacement, and some trench drains here to direct the water from the curb line into the bioretention facility. Here's some section views. Note here, this is the biosoil mix. It's only 12 inches deep because, like I mentioned before, the groundwater table is a little bit deeper here, but still not really that deep. So we had to use a little bit shallower layer of bioretention soil mix. And then here, there's some perforated pipes that we placed under the pervious concrete driveway to provide more storage volume and try to encourage more infiltration to occur. We also had a lot of curbing, edge treatment, and then we added PVC liners along the side to help protect the integrity of the pavement as well as any building structures that were nearby. So here is on the left was a before photo, and on the right was a rendering that we showed to the public. Here's some photos during construction. This area is highly urbanized, a lot of constraints, including utilities that we had to deal with and work around. Here's some photos that show a lot of the form work for the curbing and the edge treatment. And then here's some form work for the trench drain that was installed as well. And getting closer to being completed with construction, here's a photo of that trench drain again after it was done. And here's an overflow structure that was placed inside of the bioretention facility. And here's when construction is mostly complete, almost complete, a little bit left to do here, but with where those barrels are. But you can see this is standing at the Atlantic Ocean side facing towards the bay. Here's where the permeable concrete is and the bioretention facility, and just a little bit closer view, permeable concrete, the fencing we placed here, and then zoomed in, you can see the plantings that were done here in the mulch area. And then, as I mentioned, the trench drains as well. Here's a nice drone photo of the finished product. It's really helpful to have these drone images. So these plans identified other implementation projects, but there's two of them that we are currently moving forward with, the next ones that are moving forward. One is the Sunset Park Integrated Coastal Green Infrastructure, and the other is the SR1 Median Concrete Removal and Pedestrian Safety Project. The Sunset Park project is similar to the Reed Avenue project, but there's some additional elements. There's actually wave attenuating devices, or WADs, off the shoreline. And there's also a trail element in here as well. And then the SR1 project is primarily removing impervious to reduce runoff, but it also involves some pedestrian safety improvements because it's creating a deterrence for mid-block crossings by adding a fence within the median. So here is a concept plan of the Sunset Park. This is actually Sunset Park here, and this is Dagsworthy Street. There's some WADs here, wave attenuating devices here, some marsh creation along here with some tow protection. This is a levee that's going to be added here for flood protection. And on top of that levee is a trail, and then that trail will extend with some boardwalk out here. Not sure if it'll go across here, but it'll provide some access to the public as well. And then this is the this area is currently monolithic concrete median. Going to remove that concrete median in some select areas, and then basically replace it with soil and amend that existing soil that's in there, and then do plantings in there, and then place a fence along there. So that's both these plan views show with some of those areas. You can see from here there's some crossing areas, pedestrian crossing areas, but people tend to try to cross mid-block. So the idea is by doing these plantings and the fencing in here, it will deter people from doing that. And the fence that we're going to place there is like a beach-themed fence. So it's actually wooden posts with rope across here. So it'll give it more of a beach theme to it. So these are projects that are coming up soon, and we're currently looking for funding to get those projects implemented. So that's all I had, and Jim and I will take any questions if you all have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry and Tim, for that excellent information about this collaborative program to protect and improve the Delaware Island bays. Larry's here to answer questions, and we do have some questions, so let's go to them. The first one is, I'm not familiar with shell bags. What is their function, and are they commonly used on coastal projects?
Yeah, the shell bags are, we take spent shell. They collect, actually this Delaware Center for Inland Bays collects the shell from the restaurants in the area, and they actually keep it at their farm, and they take the shell and put it in, usually in plastic mesh bags, and you can use it for shoreline stabilization projects. Sometimes you can use it as a dissipating, to dissipate the energy, but in our case, the energy was too high, so we had to use rock sill. But we used the shell bags on there to naturalize the rock, and also to make it more for habitat. There was some room for habitat. We didn't introduce any actual oyster shell. That's what it is, any oyster spat to the shell, but just hopefully the oyster will volunteer and attach onto the shell over time. We also are using, instead of plastic, we're starting to use more core mesh type bags instead, so that keep the plastic out of the bay.
Great. Catherine wants to know, what was it a permitting challenge? Can you maybe talk about the interplay between funding timelines and permitting that you may have experienced? Yeah,
permitting is obviously a challenge anytime you're dealing with the water, and especially tidal. We had some tidal wetlands that we were dealing with. We were creating tidal wetlands, so we were able to get a nationwide permit to do the work through the Corps. But yeah, it definitely was part of it. Delaware also has a leasing agreement where anytime you do anything in the water, you're supposed to actually pay to do that. But in this case, the town was exempt from doing that because it's a public entity, but it's really set up for private entities. But yeah, so the permitting process definitely was a critical path in getting it built, actually getting it constructed.
Okay, we have one more question from Jennifer, and about 1 minute left, and it's a two-part question. So first she says, nice presentation. Was inundation of the streets from the ocean during storms taken into consideration, or just flooding from the bay? And the second part is, are the oyster shell bags plastic mesh? So I guess that part you've
Yeah.
already dealt with.
Yeah, I did cover that. Yeah, we just focused on the water from the bay. The ocean side has dunes all along there, and even the FEMA model assumes now that, or the most recent one assumes that the dunes would hold. That isn't always necessarily the case, but yeah, we did not look at the ocean side flooding. It was just the bay side flooding. And then, as I mentioned, we did use plastic on this project, but we've had other projects where we're starting to incorporate biodegradable materials like core matting.
Larry, that's all the time we have, but thank you for answering these questions, and to you and Tim again for your great presentation. I also want to say that this concludes this session and really the formal part of the conference. I want to thank everyone for attending the session and participating in the virtual conference. Hopefully we'll see you in person next year in Orlando, Florida from May 15th to the 19th.